Just last week, we found out that Collingwood had engaged in early stages of a trade conversation with Essendon for Jake Stringer. And at the time, it sounded like a great idea. Jake Stringer had kicked 40 goals in 2024. Essendon advised Jake Stringer that he should probably shop around because he's only being offered a 1 year extension, which is already automatically triggered because of what some sort of clause he hit within his contract to extend it to the end of 2025. They said, hey, if you want a contract for 25, 26 and beyond, you might have to look elsewhere. And at the time, it made sense, right? And then a few days later, we find out that Collingwood have seemingly pulled out of the conversations. And it was a bit of a head scratcher for all of us because you've seen in the comment section in the Pies Footy community, most of us were saying, hey, if we can get Jake Stringer on a 2-year contract for 300-400 a year, maybe less, and only have to give away a late second rounder or an early third rounder, it's only going to be beneficial for the club. And that argument probably remains true in the context of what we see on the field. But I think we found out exactly why, or potentially why. There's a smoke. There's a massive smoke. And usually where there's smoke, there's a fire. We found out that the AFL Integrity Board reached out to Essendon and advised to be cognizant of who they are allowing into their games post-match, into the club rooms. That was in specific reference to Jake Stringer and delisted defender Nick Hind.
Jake Stringer. Okay, now this is a report that has come out today that the AFL Integrity has warned Essendon over Nick Hind, Jake Stringer's associates and others. Now, we've been working on this story for a couple of weeks and well done to the Herald Sun. I'm not sure who the reporter was there who got it up, but that we're following this story closely, and it has been sort of tempering some of the comments we've been making about whether Jake Stringer might even go to Collingwood. It's been the talk behind the scenes in football for the last fortnight amongst clubs that there have been people getting into the Essendon rooms that the AFL Integrity Department have said they shouldn't be there.
They were apparently in association with undesirable figures in the underworld. And this is big because something like this hasn't been relayed from AFL Integrity to a club since the whole Jake King incident, where Jake King was tied in with bikies. I'm going to say allegedly because I don't know for sure. So allegedly tied with the bikie gangs. That's the last time the AFL Integrity stepped in for something like this type of matter. And that has to be the reason why Collingwood have pulled out. And when you look at, I guess, some of the previous issues Collingwood have had more recently, we can go back to bringing Dane Beams over with uncertainties behind his mental well-being and dealings with his gambling issues, and maybe had some debts to pay to people outside of the world, outside of the AFL world, who are also undesirable figures potentially. Jack Ginnivan brought his own issues with his party antics, and then you have De Goey, who's had some issues in the court that, while not necessarily deemed guilty, this is unwanted media attention, and then even Steve-O with the gambling. So I think Lepich and the selection panel, when it comes to trades and draft and whatnot, they've gone into full risk mitigation mode and aren't willing to have conversations with someone like Jake Stringer, who, let's put to the side the association with these undesirable figures. He still has an attitude problem that exists on the field. His lack of pressure at times, his disconcerted intent on the game. These are some things that are already of concern without knowing that he has these outside of issues that could potentially be brought into the Collingwood Football Club and affect the culture that exists at Collingwood right now. That is why I ultimately think Collingwood have pulled out of this, and this whole debacle was initially reported by Slobbo, Mark Robinson, and then further touched on by Footy Classified, and that panel included Damien Barrett and one of Bombers' own, Matthew Lloyd. So without this being absolute fact, it doesn't seem like this has come to a shock for anyone in the world of people that is close to Jake Stringer and the club. It seems like this has sort of been kept under the wraps for a while and now sort of just come out for whatever reason. So yeah, I think ultimately Collingwood don't want to add fuel to the fire and create the chance of a toxic environment at the club where we've had to navigate through those environments in the past as a club. And if you've seen my video previously about delisted options, I was surprised with Nick Hines delisting. He's played some games this year, has some real run and dash, and is quite always energetic on the field and gives his all. Maybe this is one of the reasons why it was easy for Essendon to delist Nick Hines, to sort of, it was probably for Essendon to detach themselves from those people who have that culture outside of what goes on in the four walls at the Essendon Football Club. So it's disappointing. Jake Stringer, in a perfect world, fits Collingwood's needs right now as far as needing a third key tall forward slash second key tall forward who can really add some dynamic in our forward line as well as our midfield when you've got Reece McInnes, Ash Johnson, Nathan Kruger, all relatively tried and failed. The caveat's probably Reece McInnes. I think there's still something left to be turned over for Reece, but in the now, Jake Stringer would be perfect in 2025. Seems like not to be. Let me know what your thoughts are after all this news coming to light. Would you still consider someone like Jake Stringer to come to the club and trust that the culture can change him and his ways outside of the club? Or are we doing the right thing by mitigating this risk and completely avoiding someone like Jake Stringer in 2025? Go Pies.